of interviewers here. We'll get to them in just a moment, and we're going to be having a conversation, somewhat of an interview, just discussing some things, some topics with Mr. Rather. Let me start off by saying we're so glad you could join us. I know you're really busy in your schedule, and we're glad you could stop by and fit us in.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here.
All right, we'll run around the table real quick and introduce everybody to see who's here. To my immediate right is Mr. Mike Barger, and just to give a background on him, he's a junior here at Sam Houston, and he recently this year he won first place in TV news announcing at the Texas Intercollegiate Press Association, and he's also a news anchor here on Cable 7, and when he graduates, he wants to work in network news anchor, so you better watch out there, Mr. Rather. He might be coming after your job. Next to Mike is Clay Marshall. He's a graduating senior. In December, he'll be graduating. He's a big-time writer around here. He's won several writing awards, and he's really well known around the department for his writing skills. And he plans to work in writing and continue with production in film or perhaps television. Next to Clay is Paige Bradbury, who's a senior. She's the president of the local chapter of the National Broadcasting Society. She is the 1994 News Anchor of the Year here on Cable 7, and she also competed in the Intercollegiate Press Association here in Texas earlier this year, and she won first place in news writing, and she aspires to be a national news correspondent. Once again, my name is John Dawson. I'll sort of be moderating things. I'm a graduating senior. I'll be graduating in December. This year, earlier, I received the Morris Frank Dan Rather Broadcast Journalism Award Scholarship, so I thank you for that, helping me with my education. And I think I'm going to maybe look at teaching radio, television, and film after I graduate in December. So enough about us. We know all about us. Now let's, and I think we all brought our resumes, right? Did we all bring our resumes, Mr. Ryder? Oh, maybe I was the only one that brought a resume. So here's the resume. Maybe we'll get to that a little bit later when we're critiquing or something. But enough about us. Let's jump to the question. That's really why we're here, to talk more about you. Today's a big day here on the campus. Like I said, we've been looking forward to this for a long time, coming down and made a special trip. So the statues tomorrow, homecomings tomorrow, all kind of great things happening. And we're really honored to be able to name the building Dan Rather Communications Building, and I know alumni are honored and current students are honored. Well, we want to know more about you. How do you feel about it? How does it feel to have a building at your college named after you?
Well, first of all, I'm delighted to be here, as I mentioned to you earlier, John. And I feel both honored and humbled by it. No one deserves this kind of thing, and I know that I don't deserve it. But one of the feelings that has been growing within me ever since Dr. Anderson stunned me, and he really did stun me. I'd like to think that I don't get knocked back by very many things at my age and stage, but when he came to New York and told me about the building, I really was stunned. But one feeling has been growing on me is one that, while I know I'll never be able to deserve having this honor, that I have rededicated myself to working harder to try to come a little closer to deserving it and become as close as I can to deserving it.
Okay, and we're like I said, we're really delighted you're able to come here as part of the dedication and especially stop by here in the studio. We're going to move around the table now, and we'll start with Mike. And he's, like we said earlier, he's interested in being a network news anchor, and that's one of your current positions right now. I also believe you're the managing editor of the CBS Evening News.
Right.
And so he's got a few questions he wants to discuss about that position that you have now.
Thank you, John. Mr. Rather, what an awesome responsibility it must have been for you to fill the shoes of the most trusted man in America, Walter Cronkite, back in 1981. Wondering what kind of responsibility and pressure did you encounter, since you were typically regarded as a reporter and not an anchor, and knowing that the world's eyes were going to be on you?
Well, thanks for asking, Mike. I did feel the pressure. You know, pressure is my business in a lot of ways. But I'd be kidding you if I said that professionally, I don't recall very many times when I felt more pressure. Maybe at the time of the Kennedy assassination and a few other times, but I felt the pressure. Partly because I had been told, and rightly so, a lot of people who care about me, don't take this job, Dan. That you can't follow a legend, a justifiable legend, such as Walter Cronkite, and survive. The way it was put to me by one of my Texas friends, Bill Johnson, was the first person after Cronkite in that job was going to get his head blown off. And he was right. And I felt the pressure, but I also felt the challenge. I like a challenge. It's one of the things I learned at Sam Houston, is how to recognize a challenge, how to welcome a challenge, and how to meet a challenge. So those are some of the thoughts that went through my mind. I do think that I made a mistake. I made a lot of mistakes in my career, and I think perhaps one of the mistakes I made was being determined to remain first a reporter. I thought of myself as I came into this job, and I think of myself today in the job, and I will tomorrow, as a reporter anchor, not as an anchor reporter. That may have been a critical mistake for me, and I recognize that. But I can smile when I recognize it and say, I really couldn't have done it any other way. because that's what's within me. So I had to do it that way, and that's the way I've chosen to do it. But I do recognize there was another way to do it, which is to say, listen, reporting got you here, and yes, you're going to continue to be a reporter, but think of yourself more as an anchor. Think of yourself as an anchor reporter. I didn't do that. I haven't done that. I, to this day, think of myself as a reporter anchor. And looking back on it, in some important ways, it was a mistake.
I'm sure you've had many memorable moments since you've been with the CBS News organization. Is there one defining moment of your career?
I don't think I can say any one. You know, I've been so lucky, and God has blessed me so greatly. That working for CBS News, I've had an opportunity to be near some history. I mentioned the Kennedy assassination. I guess if I had to pick one moment when I knew that everything was on the table, and that when I perhaps prayed a little harder, that I could be at my best, or if not at my best, something near my best, it would have been during those 4 dark days in Dallas. But covering the civil rights movement, Dr. Martin Luther King, when the movement was hanging by a thread, trying to make its way, covering young American men and women in combat in Vietnam, the collapse of the Johnson presidency, the resignation as an unindicted criminal co-conspirator, President Nixon. All of those times, I would say, were defining moments. It's one of the things I like about daily journalism, that whether you play the game at a relatively low level or a high level, you play it every day. And if you make a mistake one day, you get to come back the next day and do it better, do something great. If you do it pretty good one day, the next day you know you got to turn around and do it again. And in that environment, you get a lot of defining moments, for better and for worse.
What we're going to do right now, you also have a couple other positions at CBS besides the network and the evening news as an anchor. You also work with 48 Hours, and in the past you have worked with 60 Minutes, and Clay's going to discuss a little bit about those two topics.
Thank you, John. Mr. Rather, after your time at 60 Minutes as a reporter, you mentioned that you think of yourself as a reporter first. You went on to do the CBS Evening News. Did the creation of 48 Hours somehow fill a void for the reporter inside you that the Evening News could not?
Yes, it did. That I had dreamed. I'm a dreamer. One of the things I'd always dreamed of doing was to try to do a weekly documentary series. We don't want to go too deeply into this because we only have time and it's not my favorite subject, but documentaries have become a bad word for most for all network news operations, because the belief is that documentary is a word that drives viewers away from the set. I myself do not believe that, but there are a lot of people in decision-making places who do. But I dreamed of doing a weekly documentary series, and that dream I worked with others. Howard Stringer, who's now the president of CBS Television, all of television was in news at that time. You know, we dreamed of doing a weekly news documentary, and one of the reasons I redoubled my efforts to do that after I got into the anchor chair was I did think it'd give me a little more opportunity to, break out of the office, grab a pencil and get out of the office, which I like to do. And it has worked out that way.
Okay. How, other than, I would assume, a little more extensive, how would the coverage of a news event differ between the CBS Evening News and 48 Hours?
Well, the CBS Evening News is a daily news broadcast. And our attitude is we're hard news, daily news, and we Christ a deadline every day. With 48 Hours, we generally have at least 48 hours before we do the broadcast, although sometimes, Haiti would be a recent example, we report it as it happens. But generally the difference is with 48 Hours, we have a little more time to be thoughtful, a little more time to put things into context, weave in background, and put things into perspective than we do in the daily news. Because daily news, whether you do it on the CBS Evening News or for the Houstonian or Huntsville item, you always feel that pressure of the daily deadline.
How did 60 Minutes most, going back to 60 Minutes, how did it most prepare you for the evening news, or did it help at all?
Well, I think it helped a great deal. First of all, it gave me a great deal of added confidence. That I'd love to tell you that I always have had confidence. By this time I consider myself a reasonably confident reporter. Confident, not necessarily competent. But each time you meet a new challenge, each time you take on something new that really pushes you to get the best out of yourself, then I think you improve. And 60 Minutes did that for me. 60 Minutes also put me with some very good other reporters. And as you know, competition makes you better. It certainly made me better. And so in that sense, 60 Minutes was the final preparation for the evening news.
We've had an opportunity to talk a little bit about the present and the past, and now we'll move on to Paige and we'll discuss a little bit more about the future. And I'm just to set it up a little bit, as when we look at the future of broadcast, television, news, and broadcasting, a lot of people are discussing ethics and checkbook journalism and the tabloid news, and maybe that's the future, or maybe it's not. And so Paige is going to touch a little bit on some of the ethics and some of the future that TV news is headed toward.
Mr. Rather, a U.S. News and World Report survey named you as one of the 10 most influential decision makers in the United States, as well as the most influential person outside of government. And what an awesome responsibility that must be for you. How do you maintain objectivity in a time when it's so important?
Well, thanks for asking, Paige. Two things. The late Adlai Stevenson said in another context about descriptions of one such as you just read out of U.S. News and World Report from some years ago, that stuff's all right if you don't inhale. And I try to keep that in mind as we go along. And I try real hard not to inhale it. And I don't believe it for 1 second. Now, as to objectivity, your question is, well, how do you maintain it? The answer is, I don't and I can't. Every second, every hour, every day, on every story. It is not humanly possible. However, I do believe in objectivity. I do not agree with those in journalism, both print and broadcast today, who say objectivity was never possible, or if it ever was possible as a mainstream journalism ethics standard, it's an anachronism now. I don't agree with that. And it's not because I don't shift with the times. I'd like to think my record indicates I can shift with the times. But there's about some things you shouldn't shift. My late father said, you better know what you stand for or you'll fall for anything. Well, the problem with getting off the objectivity standard is you begin to fall for anything. I believe in the goal of being objective on every story. But my experience has taught me that I know I can't do that. But I think of it like something from the Ten Commandments. And I don't mean to be disrespectful to anyone's religion here, much less my own. But we all know that the Ten Commandments, they're a goal worth striving for. They're a goal out there, a polar star that you move toward. But you know that you cannot in every way, every day, meet the standard of the Ten Commandments. So it is with objective journalism. Simply because you can't do it well all the time doesn't mean you shouldn't strive to do it. And, you know, I've dedicated my professional life, my time in the craft, to trying to be as objective as possible. And that means accuracy and fairness run side by side. And that you, insofar as it's humanly possible, you should drain out your own feelings, your own background, your own opinions of things, and give it to people as straight as you can.
How do you decide, with that said, how do you decide where to draw the line between your reporting as well as exploiting a situation, say the O.J. Simpson trial, for example?
It's tough. And again, I don't always do it well. In fact, I'm constantly humbled by how often I fail at this. First of all, there is no set line. You know, in a lot of professions, in many crafts, someone can say, okay, this is it. Physics, for example. There are laws of physics. There are very few laws when it concerns this journalistic line. So you don't always know where the line is. So when I say it's difficult, that's part of what I'm talking about. Number two, each story is different. Each story is unique into itself. Listen, the Simpson story is a great story. I do think it would be irresponsible not to report something about the Simpson story. But we all know that we all, and I include myself in this, we've over-reported the story. And in some cases, about this I do not include myself, knock on wood, not yet, people run with stories that are unsourced or they're fragilely sourced. Sometimes people have gotten way over the line of entertainment into journalism. All these things are wrapped up in the Simpson case. The answer is you can't do it very well. But again, I think you have to have a wee small voice within yourself. This is what I would encourage younger journalists to spend some time thinking about. What is it that you believe in? What is it that you really believe in? If you don't know that, then each time you run across something like the O.J. Simpson case or the Bobbitt case or the Menendez case, I mean, run down the whole list of these stories in which you say, gosh, the news director's all over me to run this thing, or the city editor wants more about this. You have to have a voice within yourself that says, listen, I will go this far, but I can't go any farther than that. or a voice that says, these are things that I will not do. If you don't develop that, early, then you'll constantly be sort of whipped by the wind of stories such as the O.J. Simpson case.
Okay, we've talked a little bit about the future. In just a minute, we're going to open it up and just for some general questions. But to start off the general questions, I think I want to throw my 2 cents in with one more question I have. We've been studying a lot about the future of TV and where's it going, and the news in particular. And I'm interested on your thoughts. You've been in the business a while, and you see where things are heading, and you probably know a lot more than some of my professors might know about where things are headed because you're in there. But I'm interested in network news, in that there's a couple new networks coming online in January, and then the Fox network exists already, and neither of those are going to have network news. Can you have a successful network and not have network news?
Yes, you can. I believe you can have a successful entertainment network and not have any news, or have very little news, and or have news that's not integrity-based. I don't think that you can be a full-service network with global reach and not have some fairly strongly integrity-based news component. That's my belief. I do think that there's a future for network news. It may not be in the form we now know it. Listen, all 3 of the current networks may be out of business down the road. I think somebody will not only survive but thrive in the network business. One of the current networks, or one now being developed, or one that's not even on the horizons now, will survive and thrive by building itself around a strong worldwide news gathering operation and news of integrity. I think it's a good business. Now, part of my job is to make sure, insofar as I can, that if there's going to be only one doing that one is CBS News. And on my watch, part of my goal every day is to put CBS News in the best position to keep that flag flying if there's only going to be one flag. But my view of the future is I think the network news business will be a very good business in the future.
What would you consider to be your biggest professional weakness?
I'm a plunger. That I go with my gut. That's gotten me a long way, and I understand that, but it also sometimes gets me in trouble. And so from the heart, I've tried to discipline myself in that way, and I think I'm a little better at it today than I was yesterday, but not that much. I think that's probably a weakness. Another weakness is I'm not as strong a writer as I'd like to be. Perhaps it's too much to say it's in this, but I still dream of making it a strength. I'm not there yet. It's one reason I say I think and hope that my best work is in front of me, because I'd like to be a really good writer. And I didn't come out of Sam Houston as a particularly strong writer. And my journalism professor at the time, Professor Hugh Cunningham, told me that I would have to work on my writing and continue working on it if I thought, I wanted to stay in journalism and wanted a chance to be at or near the top. But I guess it's too much solid a weakness, but it's not one of my strengths.
Mr. Rather, I'm going to go back to 60 Minutes again. I'm sure the competition between the correspondents there was quite intense. I was just wondering exactly how much competition there was and who decided who got what stories.
Well, journalism as a whole, if you don't what I'm here to tell you, is an unrelentingly fierce competitive pit. It's one of the things I like about it. 60 Minutes was, in terms of external competition, in wanting to beat the world outside of 60 Minutes, was about the best environment I've been in. Some might call it the worst, because we were driven, that's not too strong a word, to be the best. I mean, we believed in excellence, and we were, to a certain extent, driven to achieve excellence. But inside, the internal competition was less than it has been in most other places I have worked in journalism, partly because when I was in 60 Minutes, we had 3 correspondents. The great Mike Wallace, Morley Safer, and I joined them as the 3rd. That we respected one another tremendously. We'd all worked together for a long period of time, so there was competition. I can't tell you there was competition between us. Every week I wanted to have a better piece than Mike Wallace had, and the reverse of that was also true. But it was competitive, but not as competitive among ourselves. But in terms of the competition going outwards, it was almost an ideal environment.
Mr. Rather, you started off in radio, in fact, KSAM. How has that further prepared you for your duties later in your career as far as 48 Hours, 60 Minutes, and your current duties at CBS?
Well, I owe KSAM a lot. It's contributed mightily. When I look back on the things that helped to get me where I am, spending a long time in radio was a key. And I have every reason to believe that most students are not going to take this seriously. But I still recommend for anyone who aspires to make their living in television news to consider an apprenticeship, and perhaps a rather extensive apprenticeship in radio. Obviously, that comes out of my own experience. That, I thought I'd be in radio the rest of my career. I'd aspired to work in print, just kind of staggered around in the early stages of print, and then wandered into radio. Tried to go back to print. Frankly, didn't make it, and came into radio. In radio, I got my confidence, and I got at least one skill that's important to television. I learned to ad-lib. That I worked low enough down the ladder in radio that I could make mistakes and it didn't kill me. And so I learned to ad-lib. So by the time I got to television, I didn't know anything about television. I was way behind the trend line on television. But I knew how to talk a story. And I could talk a story without a script. I could work a breaking story, hurricane, election night, those kinds of things. And I had confidence in that because I'd done it a lot in radio and had perfected that skill. The other thing about radio is most of the time in radio you have the fewest resources in general of anybody in journalism. The local newspaper will have more resources than you have, and the local television station will have more resources. Therefore, you have to get up earlier, stay later, and work harder in radio than you do in print or in television in a lot of circumstance. And that was my circumstance, and it certainly helped me prepare me for what was to come later.
How would you compare a good reporter as to compare a good anchorman?
I don't think you can be a good anchorman without first being a good reporter. But I must caution you, there are a lot of people who think I'm dead wrong about that. And I may be. I try never to rule out the possibility the other person is right, and they may be right about that. And I'm also in the minority in thinking that. In some ways, I'm considered to be a person wearing spats to the office and driving a Humvee wagon because I'm considered to be so far back in time that I think the core of being a good anchor person, particularly an anchor person who can last, to go the distance, that the audience must pick up something from within you that says this person knows what he or she is talking about. This person is not just phoning it in. This person is not just walking in every day at 5 o'clock, looking over the script and reading something 15, 20 minutes or a half hour later. And therefore, if you don't spend an apprenticeship as a reporter, it's rare, it's not unheard of, that you can communicate to the audience the sense of credibility and, if you will, trust that I think is absolutely essential for someone to last as an anchor. The other is that to be a good reporter, you have to think. You don't have to think to be a good anchor. And by learning to think, I think you make yourself a much better anchor. And again, I think the audience over the long haul will pick up on it. If the audience is looking, and at least, this is my own personal opinion, at least subjectively saying, does this person know what she's talking about or he's talking about? And is this person really thinking about the news? Or again, are they just come in and are they disconnected from the news? I think the audience sooner or later picks up on who's connected and who's disconnected, who's thinking and who isn't, and who knows what they're talking about and who doesn't.
Before you became the anchor at the CBS Evening News, one of your last stories in the last couple of years was the Afghanistan story. Now that you are the anchor at the CBS Evening News, do you still cover stories that dangerous? I know you were recently the first team into Haiti, but I wonder how that compared and if they had kind of keep you on a leash to keep you out of danger.
Well, I think my record shows that for whatever I am or am not, that I don't take to the leash too well. And I'm lucky to work at CBS News where they don't. We care about one another, and we do talk about such things. Having said in an earlier context that pressure is my business, sometimes danger is my business. If one aspires to be a world-class reporter, then you have to accept that. And I aspire to be a world-class reporter. I still have that dream. I still want to make of myself a first-class, world-class reporter. And to be that, then you have to accept danger sometimes. That doesn't mean you have to be foolish. I'm capable of being foolish, but I try real hard not to be foolish about such things as Afghanistan or Haiti or Somalia or Bosnia. If I had known how dangerous Afghanistan was going to be before I went in, I wouldn't have gone. I had no idea that it was going to be that dangerous. I knew it would be dangerous, but I did not know it would be that dangerous. We got inside, and there was danger every nanosecond. And I frankly, a number of times felt that we would not get out. And with that goes the responsibility of the team of people who were with me. Cameraman, sound man, producer, we had a translator, scholar who was with us. You do feel that responsibility. But back to your point, I think it's fair to say that once you become a main anchor for a network, that it's so much more difficult to convince the boss to let you go to those kinds of stories. And for good reason, that they have a heavy investment in one. And also, they're watching you closer. You know, when you're pretty far down the line, you can get there and get in before they even know you're there. But if you're anchoring, that's pretty hard to do.
I'm afraid we can't just keep talking. We do have a leash on us, and that's a time restriction, unfortunately, and I, like yourself, don't like that all the time. But let me sort of wrap things up with one final question. There are a lot of young journalists here who are studying, and there's a lot out there. And everybody has their opinion on how to be successful in the business, especially if you're already in the business. And we want to hear yours. We want to hear just a few tips real quick on things that, not necessarily you see that people are lacking, but things that are really positives when you see a young journalist.
Listen, I may be wrong. I will invoke the Anchorman, part of the Anchorman Creed in trying to answer that question. Part of the Anchorman Creed is frequently in error, but never in doubt. Now, this I believe. If you want to make it in journalism at any level, you have to learn to write and learn to fight. I don't mean physically fight, but you have to learn to fight for a story. Print, radio, television, computers, whatever the form may take, you have to be able to write, and you have to know how to fight for the story. The other is, in a paraphrase of Muhammad Ali, big like an armadillo, work like an ant. Now, beyond that, I think it's really important to understand that journalism, it's exciting, it's challenging, there's nothing like it if you can figure a way to make a living at it. But that's hard to do. Unlike so many other things, in journalism, you can be good. You can work hard. You can know what you're doing, and you can be doing a good job. But if you don't get a little bit lucky and God doesn't smile, and you're not doing the right thing at the right time with the right person watching, you may never get that break you need to break through. In law, medicine, business, any other number of professions, that's not altogether true. Perhaps they, for example, in law, like if you come into a law firm, they say, listen, if you do this for 2 years, we will then consider you for partner. If you do a good job for another 6 years, you will then be a partner. There's no place in journalism where it works that way. It's one of the things that drives a lot of people almost bonkers about the business. It's one of the things that drives a lot of people out of our craft, is because that can be very frustrating. That's why I say to people, particularly young people who want to make it in the business, you have to ask yourself, you need to take yourself away from your parents, away from your professors, away from everything else, and ask yourself the really tough question, which is, do I burn with a hot, hard flame to make it? If you don't have that in journalism, there's a very strong probability that you aren't going to make it, because you're going to get knocked down, knocked back so many times that, you're just going to get frustrated. But if you burn to do it, if you can really say to yourself, listen, I don't care about all that. Dan Rather can tell it 20 times, and I still want to do it. This is the only thing I can do. This is what I really feel so strongly within myself that this is what I have to do. Then you have a good chance to make it. If you don't burn with that hard flame, then at least have a fallback, because you may need it.
Thanks for that advice, Mr. Rather. And boy, that's some good stuff there. It kind of got a little deep there on me, a little tense. I wasn't quite expecting that.
Didn't mean to.
But that
you asked a straight question. I try to give you a straight answer.
Well, that pretty much wraps things up for today. I want to thanks for coming by Studio A in the Dan Rather Communications Building. That's where we are now. Thanks so much. And for Paige Bradbury, Clay Marshall, Mike Barger, and I'm John Nelson. Thanks for stopping by.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
You're listening to Dan Rather live on KSHU. We'll have more classics after these messages.
U90.5 KSHU, Huntsville's home for the most up-to-date international, national, state, and local news coverage. 8 times a day, 5 days a week. We also offer news breaks from Britain to get a point of view from outside the U.S. looking in. Join us here at 7, 8, and 9 for the news you need to start off your day. And again, 12, 3, 4, 5, and 6 to keep you informed throughout the day. We're KSHU, your Huntsville's news source. We'll keep you informed.
If you are on Medicare, medication may be your single largest out-of-pocket healthcare expense. Price, however, is not the only issue of concern to seniors. Safe and appropriate use of prescription drugs is also important. Studies suggest that 30 to 55% of patients do not take their medication as directed. A solution is good doctor-patient communication and a review by the pharmacist. The National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare supports prescription drug coverage as part of a comprehensive health care reform. It also supports drug utilization review as part of any prescription drug benefit.
A public service message from U 90.5.